The heart monitor screamed its endless note. 3 doctors pumped frantically on the tiny chest. Lily Thompson lay motionless, her 6-year-old body drained of color against sterile white sheets. Outside the Alaskan Field Hospital, wind howled like something dying, rattling frozen windows in their frames. Clear! Harrison Blackwell pressed the paddles down. Nothing. Sarah Thompson collapsed against the wall, her screams tearing through the room. Robert stood frozen, face carved from stone, watching his daughter slip away. Then glass exploded inward. A massive white wolf crashed through the window, scattering ice and blood across the floor. Security reached for weapons, but the creature ignored them entirely. Its pale eyes locked onto Lily with an intensity that froze everyone in place. The wolf took one step forward. The monitor flatlined a gussinette. 72 hours earlier. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Thompson family lived in a small wooden cabin on the outskirts of Fairbanks, where the forest pressed close in winter lasted 8 months of the year. Robert Thompson had once been a senior engineer at Biogenics Pharmaceuticals, pulling 6 figures. Respect in every handshake. That was before he made the mistake of having a conscience. 3 years ago, he discovered something in the company's research facility that kept him awake at nights. Animals suffering in ways that violated every ethical boundary. When he reported it, they offered him money to stay quiet. When he refused, they destroyed him. Fired without references, blacklisted across the industry, legal threats that drained their savings faster than blood from a wound. Now, Sarah worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. Mornings at the diner on Route 3, afternoons cleaning hotel rooms, evenings selling handmade crafts online while Lily slept. Robert took odd jobs: snow removal, equipment repair, anything that paid cash. They owed $87,000 to lawyers who couldn't save his career. But Lily never knew they were poor. She only knew that her father once brought home a wolf. Robert remembered that night with painful clarity. He'd gone back to the facility after hours, unable to silence his conscience. In the basement laboratory, he found cages. Most were empty. One wasn't. The wolf pup in Sid was maybe 3 months old, white as fresh snow, with eyes that held too much intelligence for comfort. There was something wrong with how it looked at him, something almost human in its desperation. He took it, simple as that, wrapped it in his coat and walked out, knowing he was burning every bridge he had left. Lily fell in love with Ghost instantly. The wolf, half wild, half something else, bonded to the little girl as if recognizing her. They were inseparable. Ghost followed her everywhere, slept outside her bedroom door, learned to be gentle despite teeth meant for tearing. Then came the incident at the frozen lake. Lily wandered onto thin ice while Sarah hung laundry. The crack echoed across the valley. By the time Robert reached the shore, Lily was under her pink jacket, a blurred shadow beneath the surface. Ghost didn't hesitate. The wolf crashed through ice. Robert's weight wouldn't support. Grabbed Lily's collar in powerful jaws and dragged her to shore. Robert pulled them both out, performing CPR while Ghost stood watch, water freezing in its fur. Lily's first words after coughing up lake water: "Ghost is my guardian angel." 2 months later, men in black SUVs came asking questions. Robert made the hardest decision of his life. He drove Ghost deep into the wilderness and let it go, watching the white shape disappear into trees, wondering if he'd just killed them all anyway. That was 2 years ago. They never saw Ghost again until 72 hours ago, when Lily started dying. It started with a headache. Lily woke that morning complaining her head hurt, pressing small fingers against her temples. Sarah gave her children's aspirin and a glass of orange juice, thinking nothing of it. Kids got headaches. The weather was changing. The barometric pressure did strange things this far north. By noon, Lily's forehead burned under Sarah's palm. The thermometer read 103. Sarah called Robert, who was 40 miles away fixing a generator. He promised to come home early. She gave Lily more medicine, wrapped her in blankets, let her watch cartoons on their ancient television. By evening, everything went wrong. Lily started seizing around 6 o'clock. Her small body went rigid, then began jerking violently. Sarah screamed for Robert, who was just pulling into the driveway. He found them in the living room, Sarah cradling their convulsing daughter, both of them crying. Then Lily vomited blood. Robert didn't remember grabbing his keys, didn't remember strapping Lily into the truck's back seat, or the way Sarah's hands shook as she climbed in beside her. The hospital in Fairbanks was 80 miles away on good roads. Tonight, with a blizzard rolling in from the north, those roads were becoming impassable. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against snow. Robert drove faster than he should have, the truck fishtailing on black ice, while behind him Sarah murmured prayers and Lily's breathing grew shallow. The world narrowed to white lines in the headlights and the sound of his daughter struggling to stay alive. They didn't make it to Fairbanks. 30 miles out, Robert saw lights through the storm, the Moose Creek Field Hospital. It was a glorified clinic, really, staffed by a handful of medical professionals serving the scattered communities too remote for proper facilities. But it was closer. It was something. Robert nearly drove through the front doors. The hospital looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. Prefabricated walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered, linoleum floors cracked from frost heave, 2 examination rooms, 1 small surgery, a handful of beds separated by curtains that didn't quite block sound or light. But they had Dr. Harrison Blackwell. The man emerged from a back office with the calm of someone who'd seen everything, late 50s, silver hair, eyes that assessed Lily in seconds. He asked questions in a clipped voice while nurses there were only 3 hooked Lily to monitors and started an IV line. What symptoms? When did they start? Any allergies? Medical history? Robert answered everything. Sarah couldn't speak, could only hold Lily's hand while machines beeped and fluids dripped into her daughter's veins. John Matthews, the lead nurse, was younger than Dr. Blackwell by 20 years. He had kind eyes and steady hands, the kind of person you trusted in a crisis. Robert watched him work, checking Lily's vitals, adjusting equipment, speaking softly to Sarah about staying calm. There was another nurse, too. Susan O'Connor, a woman in her 60s who'd been delivering babies in the Alaskan wilderness since before Robert was born. She moved with practiced efficiency, but Robert saw concern in the set of her mouth. They drew blood, ran tests. Dr. Blackwell disappeared into what passed for a laboratory while the nurses monitored Lily's declining vitals. Her fever climbed higher. 104, 105. Robert paced the hallway, boots squeaking on old linoleum. Through a window, he watched snow pile against the building. The radio said the storm would last 3 days. Nothing was getting in or out of Moose Creek until it passed. When Dr. Blackwell returned, his expression told Robert everything before words did. "We can't identify the pathogen," the doctor said. "Her blood work shows massive inflammation, organ stress, but no clear bacterial or viral markers. Whatever this is, it's aggressive." "What does that mean?" Sarah's voice broke on the last word. "It means we treat symptoms and hope her body fights it off. But I need you to understand, if we don't determine the cause within 48 hours, her chances drop significantly." The words hung in the sterile air like executioner's blades. Sarah turned on Robert then. The fear in her transformed into rage, looking for something to blame, someone to punish. "This is because of what you did, because you stole from them, because you made us targets." "Sarah, don't!" She held up a hand. "You chose that animal over our family's safety. You brought something into our home that made them hunt us. And now Lily is paying for your choices." Robert had no defense. He'd thought about this moment for 2 years, rehearsed arguments in his head, but standing there, watching his daughter struggle for each breath, all his justifications turned to ash. "I had to save it," he said quietly. "They were killing it. You should have chosen us." Sarah's voice echoed off the institutional walls. "You should have chosen your family." John Matthews stepped between them gently. "Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, your daughter needs you both right now. Fighting won't help her." But the damage was done. Sarah turned away, went back to Lily's bedside, leaving Robert alone in the hallway with his guilt. He slumped against the wall, pulled out his phone. The screensaver was a photo from 3 years ago. Lily at 4 years old, arms wrapped around Ghost's neck, both of them grinning at the camera. Happier times, simpler times. Robert thought about that day at the lake, how Ghost had saved Lily without hesitation, risking its own life for hers, how Lily had whispered that Ghost was her guardian angel. Where was that angel now? Outside. Wind howled like something alive and angry. The lights flickered. In the distance, barely audible over the storm, Robert thought he heard something else. It sounded almost like a wolf's cry. 24 hours after admission, Lily's heart stopped. The monitor's alarm shattered the 3 a.m. silence. John Matthews was first through the door, Sarah right behind him, both stumbling from exhausted half-sleep into nightmare. Lily lay perfectly still, her lips already turning blue. "Code!" John shouted, and suddenly the tiny hospital exploded into controlled chaos. Dr. Blackwell appeared as if materialized, bringing the crash cart himself because there was no one else to do it. He positioned the paddles while John started chest compressions, 30 pumps, measured and firm, on a chest so small his hands looked enormous against it. Sarah's screams filled every corner of the building. Robert held her back as she tried to reach Lily, tried to somehow pull her daughter away from death through sheer force of will. Susan O'Connor wrapped arms around Sarah, murmuring words that meant nothing, that were only soon's to fill the void. "Clear," Dr. Blackwell said. Lily's small body arched off the bed. The monitor showed nothing. More compressions. John's face was stone, professional, but sweat beaded on his forehead. 15 minutes of CPR. 20. Medical literature said brain damage began at 4 minutes without oxygen. They were long past that. "Again," Dr. Blackwell ordered. Clear? This time, the monitor blipped once, twice, a rhythm struggling back to life. Lily gasped, her chest heaving. The blue faded from her lips slowly, reluctantly, but she didn't wake, didn't open her eyes, just lay there, breathing. Each breath a small victory against the darkness pulling at her. Sarah collapsed. Robert caught her, lowered her to a chair, feeling his own legs threaten to give out. Dr. Blackwell checked Lily's vitals with methodical precision, then turned to face them. His expression was carefully neutral, which somehow made everything worse. "She's stable for now," he said, "but we need to discuss options." Options. Robert's voice sounded hollow. "There's an experimental treatment, a serum we've been developing for severe inflammatory conditions. It's not approved for pediatric use, but given the circumstances—" "No," John Matthews spoke from beside the bed, his voice sharp. "That treatment hasn't completed trials. We don't know the long-term effects." Dr. Blackwell's eyes went cold. "We don't have time for long-term. Nurse Matthews, the child is dying." Something in the exchange felt wrong to Robert, some undercurrent he couldn't quite identify. He saw John open his mouth to argue further, then close it, jaw tight. "What are the risks?" Robert asked. "There are always risks with experimental treatments, but without intervention, your daughter will code again, and next time, we might not get her back." Robert looked at Sarah, who stared at nothing, looked at Lily, so small and broken. What choice did they have? "Do it," he said. John's hands clenched into fists, but he said nothing more. An hour later, as dawn broke gray and lifeless outside, Susan O'Connor approached Robert in the hallway. She carried a clipboard with printouts information from the hospital in Anchorage. "They have a pediatric critical care unit," she said quietly. "Better equipment, specialists. If we could get Lily there." "How far to 200 miles. In this weather, by ambulance, maybe 6 hours. If the roads stay open." Robert's heart lifted for the first time in days. Then Susan showed him the next paper. The transfer would cost $50,000. Their insurance, the bare-bones catastrophic plan that was all they could afford, wouldn't cover emergency transfers. They'd need cash or a credit card authorization before the ambulance would even dispatch. $50,000. Robert owned a truck with 200,000 miles and a cabin with a mortgage underwater. His bank account held $800. Sarah's held less. Their credit cards were maxed from legal fees, and no bank would loan them money after the bankruptcy filing. "There has to be a way," Robert said, but he heard the hopelessness in his own voice. "I'm sorry," Susan said, and he could see she meant it. He spent the next hour on the phone anyway, called old friends who didn't answer, called his sister in Seattle who had her own family to support, called the loan sharks who charged interest rates that should be criminal. None of it mattered. $50,000 might as well have been $50 million. The weather forecaster on Susan's radio delivered the final blow, the storm intensifying, roads closing, the highway to Anchorage now officially impassable. Even if they had the money, there was no way out. They were trapped. Robert found himself outside despite the cold, standing in the hospital's small parking lot where wind tore at his jacket and snow stung his face. 4 vehicles sat half buried in drifts. Beyond them, nothing but white emptiness stretching to a gray horizon. He pulled out his phone, looked at that photo again, Lily and Ghost, both smiling. He remembered releasing Ghost into the wilderness, watching it disappear. Remembered the look it gave him, not accusation, but understanding, as if the wolf knew this was necessary, as if it accepted the sacrifice. Michael would have known what to do. Robert's brother had always been the strong one, the decisive one. Michael would have found a way to save Lily, but Michael was 4 years dead, and Robert was alone with choices that weren't really choices at all. "I'm sorry, Michael," he whispered to the storm. "I promised I'd protect her. I promised I'd keep her safe. And I'm failing, just like I failed you." The wind answered with a howl that could have been agreement or condemnation. Inside, Dr. Blackwell administered the experimental serum. Robert watched through the window as clear liquid dripped into Lily's IV line. John Matthews stood nearby, arms crossed, his jaw set in a way that spoke of deep disagreement he couldn't voice. Why couldn't he voice it? That question nagged at Robert. John clearly thought this was wrong, but Dr. Blackwell held the authority here, the medical license, the final say. John was just a nurse, just following orders. Still, something bothered Robert about the whole interaction. He thought about biogenics, about the things he'd seen in those laboratories, about how corporations valued profits over lives, data over suffering, about how easy it was for good people to justify terrible things when someone in authority told them it was necessary. Sarah sat by Lily's bed, holding their daughter's hand, praying in whispers. She hadn't spoken to Robert since their argument. The space between them felt like miles instead of feet. 48 hours. Dr. Blackwell had said they were already at 24. Time was a predator circling closer, and Robert had no weapons left to fight it. That night, he sat alone in the hallway, head in his hands, exhausted beyond sleep. The hospital was quiet except for the wind and the beeping of monitors. Somewhere down the corridor, he heard Susan checking on another patient, her footsteps soft on old linoleum, and beneath the wind, so faint he thought he imagined it, came another sound, a howl, distant, mournful. Robert lifted his head, listening. It came again, closer this time, or maybe just clearer, cutting through the storm's noise. It sounded like grief, like determination, like something wild refusing to stay away. Robert stood, walked to the nearest window. Snow obscured everything, reducing the world to shades of white and gray. But for just a moment he thought he saw movement, a pale shape against the darker trees. Then it was gone, if it had ever been there at all. Behind him, Lily's monitor beeped steadily. Each beep a heartbeat, each heartbeat borrowed time. The clock was ticking. The second night brought worse weather. Wind screamed against the building with enough force to rattle the window frames. Snow fell so thick it erased the world beyond 10 feet, turning the hospital into an island, floating in white chaos. The power flickered twice before the backup generator kicked in with a grinding rumble that never quite stopped. Susan O'Connor was making her midnight rounds when she saw it. At first, just movement in her peripheral vision, a pale shape outside the window at the end of the hallway, there and gone so quickly she thought exhaustion was playing tricks. She was 65 years old and had worked double shifts for 3 days straight. Hallucinations wouldn't be unreasonable. Then she saw it again. closer this time. Something large and white moving through the storm with purpose, not the random drift of wind-blown snow. Susan walked to the window, cupped her hands against the glass to block the interior light. For a moment, she saw nothing but the blizzard. Then the shape emerged from the white, a massive wolf. Pure white, except for dark eyes that caught the building's lights and threw them aback with an intensity that stopped her breath. The wolf stared directly at her. Then it turned and disappeared around the corner of the building. Susan's hand went to the radio on her belt, but she hesitated to call it in. Say what? That she'd seen a wolf. This was Alaska. Wolves were hardly uncommon, but something about the way it moved, the way it had looked at her, sent ice down her spine that had nothing to do with temperature. She decided to check the patient rooms, just to be safe. Lily's room was at the west end of the building. Susan approached quietly, not wanting to wake Sarah, who'd finally fallen into fitful sleep in the chair beside the bed. But when Susan looked through the window in the door, her blood froze. The window, the large one that looked out toward the forest, stood partially open, not broken, but forced, as if something had worked the latch free from outside. Snow had already accumulated on the sill, and standing beside Lily's bed, massive and impossible, was the white wolf. Susan's scream brought everyone running. Robert reached the room first, shouldering through the door with no thought for his own safety. He stopped dead at what he saw. The wolf stood on its hind legs, front paws planted on either side of Lily's small form, its head lowered toward her face. For one terrible moment, Robert thought it was attacking her. Then he heard the sound. It made, a low, keening whimper that sounded almost human in its grief. Dr. Blackwell arrived seconds later, took in the scene, and immediately barked orders. "Security, get that animal away from the patient." The hospital's single security guard, a retired state trooper named Dave, who mostly dealt with drunk fishermen, appeared with his sidearm drawn. "Don't move. Mr. Thompson, I've got a shot." "Wait." John Matthews pushed past everyone, hands raised. "Wait! Don't shoot! I know this wolf." Everyone turned to stare at him. John moved slowly into the room, speaking in a low, steady voice. "Easy, boy, easy. I'm not going to hurt you." He glanced back at Dr. Blackwell. "This is Ghost, the wolf Robert took from Biogenics 3 years ago." The color drained from Doc Blackwell's face so fast Robert noticed even through his own shock. The doctor's hand went to the doorframe as if needing support, his eyes wide and fixed on the wolf, with an expression Robert couldn't quite read. Fear, recognition, something else. "That's impossible," Doc Blackwell said, his voice tight. "That animal should be dead, or miles from here. But it's not." John took another step closer. The wolf's eyes tracked him, but it didn't move from Lily's bedside. "It came back. For her, Robert found his voice. Ghost. The name felt strange in his mouth. "After 2 years? Is that really you?" The wolf's head turned toward him. For a moment, man and animal stared at each other. Then Ghost's tail moved just once, a small sweep that might have been recognition or might have been chance. But Robert felt something click in his chest. This was Got. Older, larger, scarred by 2 years in the wild, but unmistakably the same creature he'd released into the forest. Ghost had come back. Sarah woke then, groggy and disoriented. Her eyes focused on the wolf standing over her daughter, and she lurched to her feet with a strangled cry. Get away from her! But Ghost didn't attack, didn't even growl. It simply lowered its head and pressed its forehead gently against Lily's hand where it lay pale on the white sheets. The gesture was so tender, so clearly protective, that Sarah froze. It's not hurting her, John said softly. Look, it's trying to help. Dave still had his gun raised. Dr. Blackwell, your call. Dr. Blackwell stood silent for a long moment, that strange expression still on his face. Finally, he said, Lower your weapon, but keep it ready. Everyone else, out. We need to assess the situation without crowding the animal. They retreated to the hallway, though Robert refused to go far. Through the window, he watched Ghost settle onto its haunches beside Lily's bed, never taking its eyes off her face. How did it even get here? Sarah whispered. That's hundreds of miles of wilderness. Wolves can travel 50 miles a day, John said. If it started 2 weeks ago, sensed something was wrong. He trailed off, seeming to realize how that sounded. Animals don't sense things like that. Dr. Blackwell said sharply. This is coincidence. The storm probably drove it to seek shelter, and it happened upon the hospital. But Robert didn't believe that. Ghost had come straight to Lily's room, had worked the window latch open, something requiring intelligence and dexterity. This wasn't random. This was intentional. Over the next hour, they watched Ghost's behavior grow stranger. The wolf refused to leave Lily's side. When Susan brought food, raw meat from the hospital's small kitchen, Ghost ignored it. It drank water when offered, but otherwise kept its attention fixed on Lily. Most concerning was its reaction to the IV line. Ghost kept pawing at it, careful not to dislodge the needle, but clearly agitated by something. When Dr. Blackwell entered to check Lily's vitals, the wolf's lips pulled back in a silent steel, positioning itself between doctor and patient. Fascinating, Dr. Blackwell muttered, but he kept his distance. It's exhibiting protective behavior, unusual for a wolf, even one that was partially domesticated. John noticed something else. It keeps sniffing the IV bag. Watch every few minutes. It lifts its head and sniffs. Robert moved closer to the window. John was right. Ghost nostrils would flare, directed at the clear bear hanging beside the bed, and then the wolf would make that whimpering sound again, not aggressive, distressed. What's it smelling? Robert asked. Nothing. Dr. Blackwell said quickly. It's saline and nutrients, standard IV fluids. But Ghost clearly disagreed. The wolf scratched at the IV tubing again, more insistently this time, and let out a low, sustained growl that raised the hair on Robert's arms. It's trying to tell us something, John said slowly. Look at it. It's not just protecting her. It's warning us about something. It's a wild animal. Dr. Blackwell snapped. It doesn't understand medical treatment. For all we know, it thinks we're hurting her and wants us to stop. Then why come back at all? Robert pressed his palm against the window glass. Why travel all this way in a blizzard to reach her? No one had an answer. Susan appeared with blankets and a large dog bed salvaged from somewhere. If it's going to stay, it needs to be warm, and we should probably let it. Stress could make Lily worse, and forcing the wolf out. She shrugged. I've seen animals do strange things up here. Sled dogs that howl for avalanches, ravens that follow search parties to lost hikers. Maybe we should trust it. De Blackwell looked like he wanted to argue, but Sarah spoke first. Let it stay. If Ghost wants to be here, let it stay. It was the first time she'd used the wolf's name. As night deepened, Ghost settled into position beside Lily's bed, head resting on crossed paws, but eyes always open, always watching. The storm raged outside. Inside, monitors beeped their steady rhythm, and in that small room, something impossible kept vigil over a dying child. Robert stood at the window until his legs ached, watching Ghost watch Lily. The wolf's ears swiveled constantly, tracking every sound. Its nostrils flared with each breath, analyzing scents Robert couldn't begin to perceive. What did Ghost smell? What had brought it back through hundreds of miles of wilderness? What was it trying so desperately to tell them about that IV bag? Robert thought about biogenics, about laboratories and experiments, about the things they'd done to Ghost before he stole it away. Wolves had senses far beyond human capability. They could smell fear, disease, chemical changes in the body. What if Ghost smelled something wrong? Something the doctors had missed. The thought lodged in Robert's mind like a splinter. He caught John's eye through the window and saw the same consideration forming there. Something was wrong, and Ghost knew what it was. John Matthews couldn't sleep, not with Ghost's behavior gnawing at his mind, not with the way Dr. Blackwell's face had gone white when he saw the wolf, not with the pattern he was starting to see in Lily's declining condition, a pattern that didn't quite match natural disease progression. At 4 a.m, with the hospital as quiet as it ever got, John made a decision that could cost him his career. He went to Dr. Blackwell's office. The door was locked, but John had master keys. Technically, they were for emergencies only. Technically, he was supposed to have authorization. But something Ghost had smelled in that IV bag haunted him, and John trusted animal instinct more than he trusted bureaucratic protocol. The office was neat to the point of obsession. Fields alphabetized, supplies organized by size and type. A photograph on the desk showed a younger to Blackwell with a little girl, maybe 8 years old, both smiling at the camera. The girl had Dr. Blackwell's eyes. John moved to the filing cabinet. Patient records, supply orders, personnel files. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until he found Lily's chart and saw the discrepancies. Someone had altered the medication log. The original entries were still visible beneath the corrections' faint indentations, where a pen had pressed hard enough to leave marks on subsequent pages. The IV fluid lot number had been changed, not corrected. As if someone wanted to hide which batch had actually been used, John photographed the page with his phone, then dug deeper into the supply cabinet, found the IV bags, checked serial numbers. Most matched the hospital's regular supplier, but 3 bags, including the one currently hanging in Lily's room, bore different markings. The lot number traced to Biogenics Pharmaceuticals. Biogenics, the company Robert had worked for, the company that had destroyed him for exposing their practices. John's hands shook as he pulled up the lot number on his phone. The search results made his blood run cold. The batch had been recalled 6 months ago. contaminated with preservatives that cause severe allergic reactions in a small percentage of patients. 3 deaths reported before the recall, all children under 10. The office door opened behind him. Dr. Blackwell stood in the doorway, fully dressed despite the hour. His expression was calm, almost resigned. "I wondered when you'd figure it out." John held up his phone, the recall notice glowing on the screen. "You're killing her. You're deliberately using contaminated fluids on a 6-year-old girl." "I'm saving her," Dr. Blackwell corrected, stepping inside and closing the door. "Sit down, John. Let me explain something about medicine you clearly don't understand." "There's nothing to understand. This is murder. This is research." Dr. Blackwell moved to his desk, picked up the photograph. "My daughter Emily had died 5 years ago. The same symptoms Lily has, the same mysterious inflammation, the same organ failure. 22 doctors couldn't save her, 22 of the best physicians in the country. And I watched my little girl die over 6 days of hell." John's anger faltered slightly, but he kept his phone ready. "I'm sorry about your daughter, but that doesn't justify—" "I found out later what killed her," Dr. Blackwell continued, his voice eerily steady. "A reaction to common IV preservatives. Methylparaben. To be specific, 1 in every 50,000 children has a fatal sensitivity to it. Emily was that one. And because no one thought to test for it, because it's so rare that it's not part of standard protocols, she died." "So you know what's wrong with Lily," John said slowly. "You know the IV fluid is poisoning her, and you're using it anyway." "I'm using it to test the treatment," Dr. Blackwell said. "I've spent 5 years developing a counter-agent, a compound that neutralizes the reaction, that could save those 1 in 50,000 children. But I can't get approval for trials. No pharmaceutical company will touch it. The patient population is too small, the profit margin too narrow. So I have to prove it works." The horror of understanding washed over John like ice water. "You're inducing the reaction. You're deliberately poisoning Lily so you can test your cure." "I'm giving her a chance," Dr. Blackwell insisted. "Without treatment, she'll die anyway. But if my compound works, she doesn't have the reaction." John's voice rose. "You're manufacturing a disease that doesn't exist in her, just so you can play hero." Dr. Blackwell's calm finally cracked. "I'm trying to make sure no other father has to watch his child die. Don't you understand? If this works, if I can prove the treatment is effective, I can save thousands of children by killing this one, by using this one to validate research that will save countless others. It's basic medical ethics. The needs of the many outweigh—" "That's not ethics. That's murder dressed up in a white coat." John moved toward the door. "I'm calling the state medical board. I'm calling the police. You're done." Dr. Blackwell pulled open a desk drawer. For one heart-stopping moment, John thought he'd draw a weapon. Instead, the doctor produced a thick manila folder and slammed it on the desk. "Before you do that, look at this. Your employment record from Biogenics. The experiments you assisted with, the animals you helped restrain during procedures you knew were unethical. You think you're innocent. John, you think your hands are clean." John's stomach dropped. "That was different. I didn't know—" "You knew enough, Bob. You were there when they tested compounds on dogs, when they induced seizures in cats to study neurological responses. You held them down, John. You were part of it. And if I go down for this, I'm taking you with me. Every prosecutor in the state will hear about Biogenics Pharmaceuticals and the nurse who helped torture animals for profit. The threat hung between them like a blade. John knew it was effective because it was true. He'd worked at Biogenics for 8 months before his conscience caught up with him. 8 months of participation in things that still gave him nightmares. He'd quit, moved to the middle of nowhere, tried to make amends by helping people in underserved communities, but the past didn't stay buried. It never did. "You can't use me to cover for this," John said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm not covering anything. I'm trying to complete essential research. When this works, when Lily survives because of my treatment, the medical community will understand. They'll see the necessity, but only if we have time." Dr. Blackwell leaned forward. "She needs 6 more hours. 6 hours for the compound to fully counteract the reaction. Then I'll have my data and Lily will recover and everyone wins." "And if she doesn't recover?" "Then I miscalculated, but she was dying anyway. John, at least this way, her death will mean something." John looked at the man across the desk and saw something he recognized from his own mirror. Someone who'd convinced himself that the ends justified the means. Someone who'd crossed lines so gradually he'd stopped noticing they were there. In Lily's room, Ghost began to howl. The sound was primal, urgent, cutting through walls and distance. It didn't sound like protection anymore. It sounded like warning. John made his decision. He lunged for the door, but Dr. Blackwell was faster. The older man's hand caught John's arm with surprising strength. "Don't make me destroy you, John. We both know I can. We both know what you did. Help me finish this, or I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are." Ghost's howling intensified. Down the hall, someone shouted. An alarm began to wail. Lily was coding again. John wrenched free from Dr. Blackwell's grip and ran behind him. He heard the doctor shouting, but the words were lost beneath the shriek of alarms and Ghost's howling and the thunder of his own pulse in his ears. Lily's room was chaos. Sarah stood frozen beside the bed, hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Robert was already performing chest compressions, counting under his breath, his face a mask of desperate determination. Susan worked the crash cart with practiced efficiency, but her hands trembled. The monitor showed flatline. Ghost stood on the bed itself now, all 4 paws planted around Lily's small body, head thrown back in that terrible howl that sounded like grief-given voice. The wolf's teeth were bared, not in aggression, but in some primal expression of anguish that transcended species. John shouldered past Robert. "Stop! Stop the compressions!" "Are you insane?" Robert didn't break rhythm. "She's not breathing. The IV, it's the IV that's killing her." John grabbed the line, traced it up to the bag hanging beside the bed. "It's contaminated. Dr. Blackwell is using contaminated fluids." Dr. Blackwell appeared in the doorway, his face flushed. Nurse Matthews is confused. The stress of the situation. "Liar!" John rounded on him. "I saw the lot numbers. I saw the recall notices. This batch killed 3 children before it was pulled from circulation." Sarah's knees buckled. She would have fallen if Susan hadn't caught her. "What are you saying? What are you saying about my daughter?" "He's been poisoning her," John said, his voice breaking. "Deliberately. to test an experimental treatment. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Robert stopped compressions, stood slowly, turned to face Blackwell with an expression that made even John take a step back. "You've been killing my daughter this whole time. I've been trying to save her." Blackwell's composure finally shattered completely. She would have died anyway. At least this way, her death would have meant something would have validated research that could save thousands. He never finished the sentence. Robert crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and drove his fist into Dr. Blackwell's face with enough force to send the older man sprawling. "Robert, no!" Susan tried to intervene, but Robert was beyond hearing. "You did this?" Robert's hands found Dr. Blackwell's throat. "You looked me in the eye and told me you'd save her." "And the whole time you were killing her." John pulled Robert off. "Barely. We need to focus on Lily. Fighting won't help her now." Sarah found her voice, raw and terrible. "Get that poison out of her. Get it out right now." John moved to disconnect the IV, but Dr. Blackwell struggled to his feet, blood streaming from his nose. "No, don't. You'll ruin everything I need. 2 more hours, just 2 more hours to measure the compound's effectiveness." "She'll be dead in 2 more hours," John shouted. Dr. Blackwell lunged for the IV line. "I can't let you stop this. I can't let Emily's death be for nothing." That's when John understood the final, horrible truth. "Emily," he said slowly, "your daughter, she didn't die from the disease, did she? You tested on her too." The look on Dr. Blackwell's face was answer enough. "Oh my God," Susan whispered. "Harrison, what did you do?" "I tried to save her." Dr. Blackwell's voice cracked. "I had the compound. I thought I had the right dosage, but she was so small, and the reaction was too fast, and He stopped, seemed to realize what he'd admitted. "I couldn't save Emily, but I can save others. Don't you see? This research is the only thing that gives her death meaning." Robert started toward him again, but Ghost moved first. The wolf launched itself from the bed with a snarl that was pure fury. Its jaws closed around the IV tubing, teeth shearing through plastic, and the contaminated fluid began spilling across the floor. Dr. Blackwell grabbed for the line, trying to reconnect it, and Ghost's attention shifted to him. "Get back!" Dr. Blackwell fumbled in his coat pocket, produced a small revolver, the kind doctors sometimes carried in remote Alaska for bear protection. "Get that animal away." "Don't!" John raised his hands. "Harrison, put it down." The gun fired. The sound was deafening in the small room. Ghost yelped, a sound so human in its pain that Sarah cried out and stumbled. Blood bloomed across the wolf's white shoulder, but Ghost didn't retreat. Instead, it lunged again, powerful jaws clamping onto Dr. Blackwell's wrist. The doctor screamed, the gun clattered to the floor. Ghost shook its head violently, the way wolves killed prey. And Dr. Blackwell went down hard, the wolf on top of him. Robert grabbed the gun, kicked it across the room. John threw himself between Ghost and Dr. Blackwell before the wolf could do more damage. "Ghost, stop, it's over. It's done." The wolf released its grip, blood dripping from its muzzle, whether Dr. Blackwell's or its own. John couldn't tell. Ghost swayed, the bullet wound in its shoulder seeping red across white fur, then collapsed beside Lily's bed with a sound that was almost a sigh. Dave, the security guard, finally appeared, weapon drawn, radio crackling. "I heard shots. What the hell happened?" Call the state police, John said, his voice eerily calm. Dr. Blackwell just confessed to murder and attempted murder. Record everything he says from this point forward. Sarah ignored all of it. She knelt beside Ghost, her hands hovering over the wounded animal. He saved her. He came all this way, and he saved her. John worked quickly, disconnecting the contaminated IV entirely. Replacing it with clean saline from a sealed bag, he retrieved himself from the locked storage. His hands were steady now, his purpose clear. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences came from his own past at Biogenics, at least, he'd done the right thing when it mattered. Dr. Blackwell sat on the floor, cradling his mangled wrist, weeping. I could have saved them. If you'd just given me 2 more hours, I could have proven it worked. You didn't want to save anyone, Robert said, his voice cold as the storm outside. You wanted to justify murdering your own daughter. Susan checked Lily's vitals, her heart rate stabilizing, blood pressure coming up, whatever was in that IV, getting it out of her system. She looked at John with something like awe. You saved her life. Ghost saved her life, John corrected, glancing at the wolf. Ghost lay on its side, breath shallow and rapid, dark eyes fixed on Lily with an intensity that hadn't diminished despite the pain it must be feeling. I just listened to what it was trying to tell us. The clean IV dripped steadily. Monitors beeped their mechanical song, and slowly, so slowly, it seemed like imagination at first color began returning to Lily's cheeks. Robert sank into the chair Sarah had vacated, put his face in his hands, and for the first time in 3 days allowed himself to believe his daughter might survive. But Ghost was bleeding. The wound in its shoulder was deep, the bullet still lodged somewhere in muscle and tissue. The wolf that had traveled hundreds of miles through wilderness, that had broken into a hospital, that had fought to protect a little girl who'd once called it her guardian angel, that wolf was dying on the floor while the child it saved clung to life just feet away. Sarah saw it too. We have to help it. John, please? We can't let it die, not after everything. John looked at the wolf, at the little girl, at the mess of blood and broken trust that this room had become. I'll do what I can, he said, but I'm a nurse, not a veterinarian, and that wound... He didn't finish. Didn't need to. They all understood what he wasn't saying. Ghost had saved Lily, but there might be no one who could save Ghost. John worked on Ghost with supplies meant for humans, his hands moving with a precision born from years of emergency medicine. The bullet had passed through the shoulder muscle without hitting bone lucky, if such a word could apply to a gunshot wound. He cleaned, sutured, bandaged, while Ghost lay perfectly still, as if understanding that resistance would only make things worse. Sarah held Lily's hand on one side of the room. Robert paced on the other. Dave had Dr. Blackwell handcuffed to a gurney in the hallway, the doctor's wrist wrapped in temporary bandaging, his eyes vacant with shock. The state police were 20 minutes out, delayed by the storm but coming. There's something in Ghost's ear, Susan said suddenly. She'd been examining the wolf, checking for other injuries when she noticed it. Looks like a tag, the kind they use for livestock identification. Nugent moved closer, angling his penlight. Embedded in the cartilage of Ghost's left ear was indeed a small metal tag, old and weathered. But it wasn't a standard animal tag. The numbers were wrong. It looked more like, "That's a data storage chip," Robert said, recognition flooding his voice. We use them at Biogenics for research animals. Each chip contained the subject's complete medical history, encoded digitally. Can we read it? Sarah asked. Robert nodded slowly. I have a reader at home from my time at the company. I kept it when I left. He glanced at Ghost, understanding dawning. Michael put this on Ghost. My brother knew I'd be able to access whatever information he stored. Your brother? Susan looked confused. Michael Thompson. The one who died 4 years ago? Robert finished. Lily's biological father. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Robert, I think it's time they knew the truth. All of it. Robert closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked older. Michael wasn't my brother. He was my best friend from childhood. We grew up together, joined Biogenics together. He was the brilliant one. I was just along for the ride. He paused, gathering himself. And Sarah isn't my wife. She's Michael's younger sister. Susan's expression shifted to something like comprehension. The wedding rings are Michael's and Sarah's from their parents' marriage, Sarah said quietly. We wore them to make the adoption look more legitimate. A married couple has an easier time adopting than a single woman barely out of college and a bachelor friend of her dead brother. But why the deception? John asked. Because of how Michael died, Robert said, and because of what he knew. He moved to the window, staring out at the storm. When he spoke again, his voice was distant, as if he were watching events from years ago play out in the snow. Michael discovered what Biogenics was doing, the illegal experiments, the falsified safety data, the contaminated products they knowingly distributed because recalls would hurt their stock price. He documented everything, and when he tried to report it, they killed him. The official story was a car accident, Sarah added. Single vehicle, icy roads. They said he lost control, but Michael was the best winter driver I knew. He'd lived in Alaska his whole life. We couldn't prove murder, sir, Robert continued. But we knew. And we knew that if they'd killed Michael, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone connected to him. Sarah was 19 years old with a 6-month-old niece. I was Michael's closest friend. We were both targets. So you faked a marriage, Susan said, created a new identity as a family unit, and hid in plain sight, Sarah confirmed. Biogenics thought Michael was a lone wolf, no family, no connections that mattered. They didn't know about me. I have a different last name, lived in a different state when Lily was born. They didn't know about his friendship with Robert. We became the Thompsons, and we disappeared into the Alaskan wilderness. John looked at Ghost, understanding beginning to form. But Michael left you something more than documents. He left you Ghost. 3 months before he died, Michael brought Ghost home. Robert said, he told me it was a rescue from a breeding facility. I believed him, but now. He gestured at the chip in Ghost's ear. I think Michael knew he was in danger. I think he prepared for the possibility that he wouldn't survive to protect Lily himself. We need to read that chip, Sarah said urgently. If Michael left information about what killed him, about what Biogenics was doing, it could be the evidence we need. Robert pulled out his phone. The reader is at the house, but I have the software on my phone. If Susan can extract the chip. Susan had worked as a veterinary assistant before becoming a nurse. Her hands were steady as she carefully removed the small metal tag from Ghost's ear. The wolf whimpered, but didn't move. Dark eyes fixed on Lily, as if nothing else mattered. Robert connected the chip to his phone using an adapter from his keychain. The screen flickered, loading. Then a video file appeared, dated 4 years and 2 months ago. Michael Thompson's face filled the screen. He was thinner than Robert remembered, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and crushing stress. But his expression was calm, almost peaceful, as if he'd already accepted what was coming. "Robert," Michael's recorded voice said, "if you're seeing this, I'm already gone. And if Ghost found you, it means Lily is in danger from the same thing that killed me." Sarah made a choking sound. Robert squeezed her hand, kept the video playing. "They poisoned me," Michael continued. Dr. Harrison Blackwell specifically. I confronted him about the contaminated IV preservatives they were still shipping, still using in clinical trials despite knowing about the allergic reactions. He offered me money to stay quiet. When I refused, he invited me to his office to discuss options. I was stupid enough to accept. He put something in my coffee. I started feeling sick within the hour. By the time I got to the hospital, my organs were shutting down. On screen, Michael paused, took a shaky breath. "They'll call it an accident, some undiagnosed condition, but it was murder, and Harrison Blackwell gave the order because I threatened to expose Biogenics' relationship with him. He's been their inside man for years, using his position to conduct unauthorized trials, falsifying data, all for research grants and bonuses." "Oh, God," Susan whispered. "He's been doing this for years." Michael's image continued. "But here's what Harrison doesn't know. I have Lily's genetic profile. She inherited the same preservative sensitivity I have. It's rare, not well documented, but it's there in our family line. If anything happens to make her sick, if she needs hospital care, that preservative could kill her just like it's killing me." Sarah was crying openly now. He knew. Michael knew she'd be vulnerable. "That's why I trained Ghost," Michael said on the video. "This wolf has olfactory senses 50 times more acute than humans. I've still spent 3 months teaching it to recognize the smell of methylparaben, the preservative that's poisoning me. Ghost knows that scent, and Ghost knows to protect Lily from it." The camera angle shifted as Michael moved. Behind him, visible in what looked like a home office, Ghost lay curled around a bassinet, Lily's bassinet. "I've documented everything Harrison's communications with Biogenics, the falsified safety reports, the trail of contaminated batches. It's all on this chip, encrypted. The password is Lily's birthday backwards. Use it, Robert. Destroy them. Don't let Harrison hurt anyone else the way he hurt me." Michael's expression softened. "Take care of my girls. Sarah's stronger than she looks, but she'll need you. And Lily." His voice broke. "Tell Lily her father loved her more than anything in the world. Tell her I'm sorry I won't be there to watch her grow up. Tell her that Ghost will always protect her, because I taught him to, because even after I'm gone, my love for her remains." The screen went black. The room was silent except for Sarah's quiet sobs and the steady beep of Lily's monitor. Robert stared at his phone, tears streaming down his face. He knew. Michael knew he was dying, and he spent his last days training a wolf to protect his daughter from the man who killed him. And Ghost remembered, John said softly, looking at the wolf with new respect. For 4 years in the wilderness, it remembered. And when Lily got sick, somehow it knew. It came back. Susan checked the files on the chip. There's evidence here to put Blackwell away for life. Multiple counts of fraud, falsified research, and now we can prove Michael's death was murder. Biogenics will be finished. Sarah moved to kneel beside Ghost, her hands gentle on the wolf's head. You kept your promise. You protected her, just like Michael taught you. Ghost's tail moved weakly against the floor. On the bed, Lily stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. Sarah was at her side instantly, Robert right behind her, both of them holding their breath as Lily's eyes opened for the first time in 3 days. Mom? Lily's voice was barely a whisper. Why are you crying? Sarah laughed and sobbed at the same time. Because I'm happy, baby. So happy. Lily's gaze drifted around the room, confused but focusing. Then she saw Ghost, lying on the floor beside her bed, bandaged and bloody, but alive. Her face lit up with recognition and joy. Ghost, she breathed. You came back. You always come back. The wolf's tail thumped harder against the floor. Its eyes never left her face. He traveled hundreds of miles to find you, Robert said, his voice thick. Through snow and cold. Through territory that should have killed him, because someone who loved you very much taught him to protect you, no matter what. My daddy, Lily said simply, as if it were obvious. Daddy sent him to watch over me. I dream about it sometimes. Daddy telling Ghost to be brave. Sarah and Robert exchanged glances. They'd never told Lily about Michael. She'd been too young to remember him. But somehow, in the mysterious way of children, she knew. Outside, sirens finally pierced the storm's howl. The state police, arriving to arrest Harrison Blackwell and begin the process of justice that Michael had died trying to achieve. But in Lily's room, none of that mattered. What mattered was that a little girl was alive, that a wolf had fulfilled its sacred duty, and that love in all its forms had proven stronger than death itself. The state police took Harrison Blackwell away in handcuffs, his confession recorded, Michael's evidence secure. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the small hospital, something fragile and precious had been saved. Ghost's recovery became the staff's single focus. John converted a storage room into a makeshift recovery space, bringing in blankets and a heat lamp. The wolf was too weak to move, blood loss and shock taking their toll. But Ghost fought with the same determination that had brought it through hundreds of miles of wilderness. Sarah refused to leave either Lily or Ghost. She set up camp between the 2 rooms, sleeping in snatches, waking at every sound. Robert brought her food she didn't eat, coffee she didn't drink. They were no longer pretending to be married, but their bond had deepened into something just as strong, survivors of the same storm, guardians of the same child. Lily improved rapidly once the contaminated IV was removed. Her fever broke within hours. Her organ function normalized. By the 2nd day, she was sitting up, asking questions, wanting to see Ghost. John wheeled her bed into the storage room. The moment Lily saw Ghost, Her face transformed. The wolf lifted its head, tail wagging despite obvious pain, and made a sound that was half whimper, half greeting. "Can I touch him?" Lily hissed gently. John said, "He's still healing." Lily reached out, her small hand resting on Ghost's head. The wolf leaned into her touch, eyes closing, the tension finally leaving its body. For the first time since crashing through that window, Ghost allowed itself to rest. "Thank you for saving me," Lily whispered. "Daddy would be proud of you." Sarah turned away, shoulders shaking. Robert put his arm around her, and this time she leaned into him, letting herself be held. The investigation moved quickly. Once Michael's evidence was unsealed, the files contained years of documentation emails, financial records, clinical trial data that had been falsified. Harrison Blackwell wasn't just a lone actor. He'd been part of a network within Biogenics that prioritized profits over safety, that had knowingly distributed contaminated products to maximize returns before recalls became necessary. The company's stock plummeted. The Sequel resigned. Federal investigators descended on their facilities like locusts. By the end of the first week, 12 executives faced criminal charges. By the end of the first month, Biogenics Pharmaceuticals had filed for bankruptcy. But the number that mattered most to Robert was different: $2.3 million. The Victims' Compensation Fund, established as part of Biogenics' settlement, paid out to families affected by the company's misconduct. Michael's death, now officially ruled a homicide, qualified. So did Lily's poisoning. $2.3 million, enough to erase debt, enough to start over, enough to honor Michael's memory by living the life he'd wanted for them. Harrison Blackwell's trial lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: Michael's video testimony, the contaminated IV bags, the pattern of deaths in his clinical trials, 12 children over 5 years, all with the same preservative sensitivity, all enrolled in studies that required IV fluids, all dead while contributing data to research that enriched Blackwell and Biogenics. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity due to grief over Emily's death, but John's testimony destroyed that narrative. He described finding Emily's medical records in Blackwell's files, the evidence that the doctor had deliberately induced the preservative reaction in his own daughter, convinced he could cure her, willing to sacrifice her to prove his theories correct. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts: 12 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 1 count of first-degree murder for Michael Thompson. 23 years to life. Sarah attended the sentencing. Robert stayed home with Lily and Ghost. When Sarah returned, she said only, "It's over. Michael can rest now." 3 months later, the Thompson family, no longer hiding, no longer pretending, moved into a house on the outskirts of Fairbanks. Not a cabin this time, but a real home with insulation and reliable heat and enough rooms for everyone, including a large bedroom on the ground floor converted into a space for Ghost. The wolf was fully healed by then, though it limped slightly on the injured shoulder. The veterinarian they'd consulted said Ghost would always have limited mobility in that leg, but it didn't seem to bother the animal. Ghost moved through the house like a silent guardian, never far from Lily, always aware of her location. The state granted them special permission to keep Ghost. Technically, it was still a wild animal, protected under Alaska's wildlife laws. But the case had made national news: the wolf that traveled through a blizzard to save a dying child. Public opinion was overwhelmingly in favor of the family keeping their protector. The governor himself signed the variance. Life found a rhythm. Sarah enrolled in nursing school, determined to honor both Michael and John by learning to heal rather than just survive. Robert took a teaching position at the university, training the next generation of engineers in ethics and corporate responsibility. Lily returned to school, where her classmates were both fascinated and terrified by the fact that she lived with a wolf. But the real healing happened in smaller moments. Sarah teaching Lily to bake Michael's favorite cookies, telling stories about her brother's childhood, Robert and Ghost sitting together on the porch at dawn, two creatures who'd both been shaped by biogenics finding peace in shared silence. Lily reading aloud to Ghost from her favorite books, the wolf's head resting on her lap, both of them content. John Matthews visited often. He'd been called to testify at multiple trials, his past at biogenics examined and ultimately forgiven in light of his whistleblowing. The medical board cleared him of wrongdoing. More importantly, he'd cleared himself of guilt, finally able to look in the mirror without seeing the young man who'd held down animals while they'd suffered. One evening in early spring, as the days finally grew longer and the snow began to melt, the family gathered at Michael's grave. It was in a small cemetery outside Fairbanks, marked now with a proper headstone that Sarah had commissioned. The inscription read, "Michael Thompson, loving father and brother, his courage saved lives." They brought flowers. They brought photographs. Lily brought a drawing she'd made of Ghost, which she tucked against the headstone. "I think Daddy can see us," Lily said. She'd grown in 3 months, no longer the fragile child from the hospital bed. "I think he's happy we're together." "I know he is," Sarah said, pulling her niece close, not hiding the relationship anymore, letting Lily know the truth about where she came from, who she belonged to. Ghost sat beside the grave, perfectly still, head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. Then he raised his muzzle and howled, not the desperate, grieving sound from the hospital, but something different, something that sounded like recognition, like greeting, like coming home. The howl echoed across the cemetery, across the awakening forest, across the landscape Michael had loved, and for just a moment Robert could have sworn he heard an answer. Not real, perhaps, just memory and longing and the wind through pine trees, but real enough. They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, a family forged not by blood alone, but by sacrifice, by loyalty, by love that transcended death. Sarah and Robert on either side of Lily. Ghost pressed against her legs, all of them facing the grave of the man who'd set everything in motion. "When it rains, it pours," Sarah said softly, echoing the words she'd spoken in the hospital. "But it doesn't rain forever. The good Lord doesn't give you more than you can handle. And every dog has his day," Robert added, smiling at Ghost, or Wolf in this case. Lily looked up at them, confused by the old sayings. Then she shrugged and turned back to the grave. "I love you, Daddy. Thank you for sending Ghost. Thank you for protecting us, even when you couldn't be here." As they walked back to the car, Ghost paused at the cemetery entrance, looked back once at Michael's grave, ears forward, tail high. Then it turned and followed Lily, faithful unto death and beyond. fulfilling a promise made 4 years ago by a dying man who loved his daughter more than life itself. The aurora borealis began its nightly dance across the sky, ribbons of green and gold shimmering against the darkness. Alaska's magic, wild and beautiful and eternal, just like the bond between a father and daughter, just like the loyalty of a wolf, just like love that refuses to die. This story reminds us that the most powerful force in our lives isn't medicine or money. It's love that refuses to quit. Michael knew he was dying, but he didn't give up. He trained Ghost to protect Lily because a father's love doesn't end with his last breath. How many of us have people in our lives who protected us even after they were gone? Maybe it was a parent who taught you values that still guide you. Maybe it was a friend whose words echo in your hardest moments. Maybe it was someone who believed in you when no one else did. We live in a world that tells us to move on, to forget, to let go. But some bonds are meant to last forever. Sarah and Robert could have walked away from each other after Michael died, but they chose family. Ghost could have stayed in the wilderness, but loyalty called him back through a blizzard. Sometimes the greatest gift we give isn't what we do while we're present, it's what we set in motion before we leave. Here's what I want to ask you. Who in your life was your ghost, the one who showed up when you needed them most? And whose life are you protecting right now, even if they don't realize it? Drop a comment below and share your story. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Don't hold back. Let's honor the people who saved us by remembering them out loud.